Millennials, born between 1981 and 1996, grew up in one of the most transitional periods in modern history. They remember a childhood without smartphones, but an adulthood shaped entirely by them. They experienced dial-up internet and social media revolutions. They were told to follow their dreams, go to college, and that success would naturally follow. And then they stepped into recessions, student debt, and a rapidly shifting job market. Psychologically, that combination matters. Millennials were raised during an era of optimism. Many were encouraged to express themselves, believe in their uniqueness, and pursue passion over practicality. Compared to previous generations, there was more emotional language at home, more focus on self-esteem, more conversations about feelings. That upbringing created a generation that values meaning, not just survival. But reality hit differently. Entering adulthood during economic instability forced millennials to adapt quickly. The 2008 financial crisis shaped their early careers. Stable jobs felt less guaranteed. Housing felt less accessible. The traditional timeline of adulthood, career, house, marriage, kids, started shifting further away. That gap between expectation and reality created a unique psychological tension. Many millennials carry both ambition and anxiety. They want impact, they want purpose, but they also carry financial stress and uncertainty. That duality often leads to overthinking. Am I doing enough? Am I behind? Should I pivot? Should I start over? Millennials are often described as the burnout generation, and there's truth to that. They entered a digital work culture where emails never stop and hustle culture became normalized. Productivity turned into identity. Rest started to feel guilty. At the same time, millennials are deeply self-aware. They question systems. They question mental health norms. They openly discuss therapy. They challenge traditional workplace hierarchies. They don't just accept that's how it's always been. They are idealistic, but with scars. And that combination makes their psychology incredibly complex. One of the defining psychological traits of millennials is their relationship with identity. This is the first generation that grew up alongside the rise of social media. They watched platforms evolve from casual connection tools into full-blown identity stages. Profiles became resumes. Photos became branding. Opinions became public records. That changes how a person develops. When your formative years include public visibility, you become hyper-aware of perception. Millennials learned early that their lives could be seen, judged, compared, and archived. That constant awareness subtly increases self-monitoring. It creates a generation that is highly reflective, sometimes to the point of self-criticism. Comparison became unavoidable. Scrolling through curated highlights of other people's achievements can distort personal timelines. Engagement announcements, promotions, travel photos, all of it creates invisible pressure. Even when millennials intellectually understand that social media isn't reality, emotionally, it can still feel like a measuring stick. This contributes to a quiet sense of falling behind. At the same time, millennials are deeply values-driven. They care about alignment between work and ethics. They're more likely to question corporate culture, advocate for work-life balance, and prioritize mental health. They don't just want a paycheck, they want meaning. That desire for meaning, however, can create paralysis. When every decision feels like it should reflect your purpose, choosing becomes heavier. Career changes are common among millennials, not because they lack commitment, but because they're searching for congruence. They also experience the shift from offline to always online communication. Texting replaced phone calls. DMs replaced spontaneous visits. That shift created convenience, but it also reshaped intimacy. Many millennials feel connected to hundreds of people, yet still lonely at times. It's a paradox of modern connection. They are more emotionally literate than many previous generations. Therapy conversations are normalized. Trauma is discussed openly. Boundaries are articulated clearly, but with that awareness comes heightened sensitivity to dysfunction, in relationships, in workplaces, in institutions. Millennials don't ignore discomfort, they analyze it, and sometimes they carry it longer than they should. Another major psychological theme for millennials is burnout, but not just physical burnout, existential burnout. Many millennials grew up being told they were special, capable of changing the world, destined to do something big. That message is empowering as a child, but as an adult, it can quietly turn into pressure. If you're supposed to be extraordinary, then ordinary days can feel like failure. This creates a constant internal dialogue. Am I maximizing my potential? Should I be doing more? Is this the right path? Layer that with economic instability, rising living costs, and constant digital comparison, and you get a generation that feels like it's always behind schedule. Even achievements can feel temporary, because there's always another benchmark to hit. Psychologically, this leads to chronic low-grade anxiety. It's not always dramatic, it's subtle. It shows up as difficulty relaxing, as guilt during rest, as feeling unproductive even after a long day. Many millennials tie their worth to output because they came of age during hustle culture. Rise and grind wasn't just a phrase, it was an identity. At the same time, millennials are deeply empathetic. They've witnessed global crises in real time. Wars streamed live, climate change updates, social justice movements amplified online. Constant exposure to global issues increases emotional awareness, but it can also increase emotional fatigue. They care deeply, sometimes to the point of overwhelm. Relationships also look different for this generation. Many millennials delay marriage or parenthood, not necessarily because they reject tradition, but because they prioritize stability first. They watched divorces rise. They saw financial instability firsthand. Security matters. And yet, despite the anxiety, the burnout, and the pressure, millennials are adaptable. They pivot careers. They learn new skills. They embrace remote work. They reinvent themselves more often than previous generations. They are not fragile. They are navigating complexity, and they are doing it in public. At the heart of millennial psychology is a search for balance, between ambition and well-being, between connection and independence, between realism and hope. Unlike previous generations, who were often taught to endure silently, millennials tend to question loudly. They don't accept burnout as a badge of honor. They talk about toxic workplaces. They normalize quitting jobs that drain them. They advocate for therapy, boundaries, and self-care, not as luxuries, but as necessities. That shift isn't weakness, it's evolution. Millennials understand something deeply. Productivity without mental stability isn't sustainable. So while they may struggle with overwork, they're also the generation pushing hardest for flexible schedules, remote options, and healthier work cultures. They're redefining what success looks like, not just wealth, but well-being. There's also resilience beneath the anxiety. They survived the collapse of traditional job security. They adapted to a digital economy. They learned to network online, build personal brands, and acquire skills independently. Many millennials had to become self-taught in ways previous generations didn't. That builds confidence, even if it's quiet. Emotionally, millennials crave authenticity. Surface-level relationships feel draining. Performative communication feels hollow. They want real conversations about fear, purpose, trauma, growth. That emotional depth makes them more expressive, but it can also make them more sensitive to rejection or disconnection. They feel things intensely. But that intensity is also what fuels their creativity, activism, and innovation. Ultimately, millennials are a bridge generation. They remember analog childhoods and live fully digital adulthoods. They understand both worlds, the slower pace of the past and the constant acceleration of the present. Their psychology reflects that tension. They are idealistic but cautious, ambitious but tired, connected but sometimes lonely, self-aware but self-critical. And maybe that's the defining trait of millennials. They are trying, deeply, constantly, to build a life that feels meaningful in a world that rarely slows down long enough to let them breathe. Not perfect, not weak, just human, in a complicated era.